Mr. President of the United States of America, my President, the organizers of the U.S.-Africa Summit 2022, fellow African heads of state here present, dear international observers, I want to thank the United States of America for organizing the second U.S.-Africa Summit. This is a laudable action to revitalize partnership and alliances with African countries. I understand this summit will continue efforts to strengthen ties with African nations that are under severe pressure by their local populations to review the significance or not of traditional alliances that stem from our colonial heritage. We, the people of the Southern Cameroons Ambazonia, regret our absence from the ongoing US Africa Summit. This would have been a golden opportunity for the US to affirm her historical vote at the United Nations in favor of the independence resolution on the Southern Cameroons Ambazonia on April 21st, 1961. I have been obliged by the people of the Southern Cameroons Ambazonia to bypass this error of omission by addressing the US Africa Summit as the uninvited 55th nation of Africa, albeit from an observer's perspective. It is our hope that the summit will be a moment of sincere introspection around the true causes of anti-Western sentiments sweeping across the African continent today. Summits like this should not be mere banquets away from home. They should not be cocktails of political pleasantries and not certainly a collection of image-building souvenirs and empty smiles. It is another opportunity for participating African heads of state to tell the truth to each other. It should also be a moment to review our partnerships and alliances with a superpower like the United States of America. During such reviews, both sides should x-ray with candor the causes of mutual failures as well as the areas where measurable progress has been achieved over the years by either side. The post-colonial philosophy that made most alliances with Africa and the West look like a beautiful girl toasted around by suitors or bidders, and whose will does not count, led to the establishment of transactional alliances and not genuine partnership alliances. That kind of posture reminds the African psyche of the infamous era of slavery. The Africa of today is in need of direct mutual beneficial politico-economic partnership alliances with America on grounds of equality and respect for each other. Africa doesn't need babysitting today. Africa doesn't need people to decide for her. Africa doesn't need systems and alliances that work more for the good of others than our own people, and leaders who appear to serve foreign interests more than national interests. This schoolmaster approach by the West may have worked for a while, but right now it is not working for Africa. The youth, and that means 60 to 75% of the 1.2 billion people in Africa, are asking why the richest continent remains the most backward today. Instead of frowning at voices like mine on the continent, instead of giving band-aid solutions, why don't we try out a cheaper option, which is one of the direct strategic partnership with the people of the continent, a Marshall Plan, for example. I said the people of the continent, not the leaders. There is a remarkable difference between the people of Africa and the political leadership in Africa today. I have the impression that based on the former alliances and operational philosophies, the West is losing the people in preference for their leaders. many of whom have long lost the legitimacy to speak for their people because they have been rejected by their people, even though they keep stealing elections. Africa is not poor. We are the richest continent in the world. Our problem is not poverty. Our problem is not hunger. It's not diseases. Our problem can be summarized in three words: corruption, exploitation, and bad leadership in power. We need to forge alliances that will help the people of Africa to address these key problems. True friends will help you fight your true enemies, not imaginary ones. America is a friend to Africa because America has what it takes to efface these three monster problems. But America will be Africa's friend indeed when they stop leading from behind on key issues affecting the continent of Africa. Remember, a friend in need is a friend indeed. The post-colonial politics of condoning corruption, exploitation, and bad leaders in power while pretentiously prescribing wrong medicines such as aid for development, as the Chinese and the French are doing on the continent today, is a time bomb. The origin of this approach dates back to the 60s when the colonial powers of Europe decided to exert economic and political power over Africa through debt management. That kind of politics was good for France and Europe from the post-World War era, but not today. Because if the buyers all die, sellers will go out of business, unless the sellers may have to be buying their own goods and services. Please, America, a viable Africa is a better friend and partner to the rest of the world than an exporter of misery, poverty, disease, hunger, crimes, and terrorism. The attitude of some of our friends aiding and abetting corruption, protecting and helping bad leadership, and rewarding corruption in Africa is adding to Africa's depression, not deliverance. This will affect all of us in the long run. Dear President Biden, Africa is very sick, and we know the medicine, and it is local, not imported. We cannot continue to pretend that all Africa needs today is more of the same. We cannot also say all countries have problems, so let Africa solve her problems. The difference is that Africa's problems have a lot of umbilical cords wrapped around her neck, complicating the birth of her dreams economically, industrially, and politically. Please, let's help Africa cut it off without fear of retribution or victimization from her trusted friends. America should not help Africa as a distant friend anymore, because until you draw closer, you will not truly acknowledge that Africa is a continent, not a country. The one-size-fits-all approach in dealing with Africa as if Africa is one country is wrong, because such an approach misses all the distinguishing details that make for strong alliances. America must be prepared to hold hands with leaders of the next generation on the continent to address the real issues Africa is facing. America cannot continue to ride on the backs of the French to protect her interests on the continent. By that I mean, America cannot act only as and when and where it pleases the French in Africa. The post-World War doctrine of sphere of influence is no longer relevant in the unipolar world. In many instances, America is either acting late or absent, and our mutual interest is in serious jeopardy. Here comes the growing symptoms of the problem: migration, civil unrest, unending wars, rising anti-Western sentiments, rising numbers of military coup d'etats, the rise and spread of extremism in sub-Saharan Africa. These have created a favorable climate for the growing Chinese and Russian influence on the continent through the help of a sit-tight, corrupt African political elite. These are the direct effects of the failure of the post-independence and neo-colonial order promoted in my own part of Africa, principally by the French. French policies towards Cameroon were developed in the 1950s by a post-war political leadership in France that sought primarily to guarantee their own survival as a nation and to uphold their status as a war leader. We, the people of the southern Cameroon and Ambazonia, were caught up in the French web when we were forced by the United Nations to get independence by joining. We voted to join La République du Cameroun as two gentlemen, but the French pushed Amadou Ahidjo to opt for reunification instead of unification, and to go for annexation instead of equality, and adopt a unitary state instead of a federation. The French also advised Ahidjo in Fumban in 1961 to reject every common sense proposal by the people of the southern Cameroons for a genuine union of two states of equal status. The French then helped to draft the fraudulent 1961 constitution that was never ratified as required by our southern Cameroon's House of Assembly in Buea. The French president, Pompidou, ordered Ahidjo to abolish the fictitious federation between La République du Cameroun and the southern Cameroon Ambazonia in 1972 through a fraudulent referendum. And then the French finally advised Paul Biya to finalize the annexation project of the southern Cameroon Ambazonia by reverting to their former name which they had before, La République du Cameroun. Throughout all these times, America has been playing the concerned observer in what is customarily referred to as France's sphere of influence in geopolitics. The CIA carried out many studies on the problem of southern Cameroon Ambazonia, warning of the rising tensions in the southern Cameroons. But America did nothing practical to engineer genuine resolution of the problem through dialogue. My fellow Americans, whenever there was a call for dialogue with the people of the southern Cameroon Ambazonia, whether it is the AAC 1 and 2 of 1993-94 or the African Court of Human and People's Rights in Banjul in the early 2000s, the French will move to reassure their puppet regime in Yaoundé that they don't have to cave in. President Mitterrand, for example, advised Paul Biya that he should not accept federalism, that in case of any uprising, Paul Biya should be prepared to use that as the alibi to crush the southern Cameroon Ambazonia and seal our fate as their conquered people. Their hope was that in the event of war, La République du Cameroun will crush us as they did to the UPC-led nationalist resistance in the 50s, like flies in La République. So in 2017, President Macron, while visiting West Africa, met with Paul Biya and asked him to send his military to declare war on the southern Cameroon Ambazonia. Little did he know that the southern Cameroon Ambazonia will rise, as we have done, with enough strength and resolve to stand and resist their barbaric, genocidal army for 6 long years and counting. Today, France seems to have lost the moral compass to instruct La République du Cameroun on the path for a political solution, to resolve what they erroneously ordered Cameroon to do in the first place. Hence, the situation in the southern Cameroon and Ambazonia needs an outsider to resolve, not the French. The French are parties to the ongoing conflict in Ambazonia. Also, the French are somewhat paralyzed at this time by certain issues deriving from their existing alliances with their former colonies. Number one, guilt has destroyed the moral authority of the French to act today on certain issues affecting the continent. Number two, the rise of anti-French sentiment in all their former colonies have also diminished France's boldness on the continent. And number three, the fear of the Russian expansion within former French colonies has taken the gusto away from the political power of the French in Africa. Number four, the expulsion of the French in Mali and Burkina Faso recently makes France want to embrace anyone who still tolerates them, no matter how bad they are, for others' interests in the region. America cannot therefore continue to rely on an unwilling ally or a paralyzed one. America must stand on her feet and use her political and economic capital in the continent for the good of the people of Ambazonia, Cameroon, and Africa. My dear President Biden, we Americans have to stop leading from behind the French because France is either unwilling to act against the status quo or is losing control too fast of her colonial allies because of her mistakes. The American interest in the Gulf of Guinea, for example, cannot be guaranteed on the backs of a morally disabled ally. Inaction is not an option either. America should not think that those who have issues with France today on the continent also have the same issues with America. The French, they need help to do what is right. They are like the biblical figure who said, "When I want to do good, I find myself doing the evil I don't want." If America continues to lead from behind in Ambazonia and La Republique, because it is so-called France's backyard, the prize will be Russia next door in the Gulf of Guinea. The Yaoundé war hawks are now leaning on Russia because the French will not help them and cannot stop them after Biya. Ambazonia, on the other hand, is the natural ally of America. America, for 60 years or 61 years, has been the number one destination of Ambazonians fleeing the torture and persecution from La République du Cameroon regime. Ambazonian American diaspora is the most powerful Ambazonian community outside Ambazonia. The children of most Ambazonian Americans today see themselves as Americans. The Ambazonian American economic power is today worth billions of dollars. Our ties with America are therefore permanent. In Ambazonia also, about 40% of the direct foreign investment in Ambazonia and the Gulf of Guinea on the Ambazonian side is American. America has a legitimate corporate social responsibility to protect Ambazonia from annihilation and to stem insecurity out of the Gulf. However, America is trying to do so by supporting a foolhardy, tyrannic leader who believes the Southern Cameroon problem can only be resolved by a lopsided military option. A tyrant that believes killing all Southern Cameroon citizens proves that he is right and everyone is wrong. A delusional despot who believes that what happened in 1961 was a reunification. In other words, a recovery of their lost territory and not a unification of two nations of equal status as was proclaimed by the United Nations. This 90-year-old genocidaire is in a class of his own. He is old and worn out. He is not worried about what or how others think. Let me remind you who Paul Biya is. He is the Hitler of our time in black skin. There has never been any dictator more brutal on the continent than Paul Biya. He is the man who declared a senseless war against unarmed civilians of the southern Cameroon's Amazonia, using tanks and helicopter gunships, just for holding a different political opinion from his and for demanding dialogue. That war is ongoing now for 5 years plus and has costed the lives of 40,000 plus innocent people. His forces have massacred and dumped the bodies of thousands of innocent southern Cameroon citizens, including the well-known case of journalist Wazizi in mass graves, littered all across Amazonia. His forces have burnt down more than 400 settlements and villages, forcing 1.6 million people, including women and children, to be displaced without care. Some live like animals in bushes without food, without shelter, without medicine, and women without pads, sanitary pads. His forces shoot and kill goats, cats, pigs, cows, and sheep belonging to villagers who escaped from their attacks. They follow their human prey into the bushes and systematically destroy their huts, their crops, and their barns where they find them. Biya commanded his forces to execute suckling babies in their mother's arms. His soldiers threw a suckling baby into a pot of boiling oil. They cut off the heads of suspected enemies, including that of one innocent Samsoya in Camara. His barbaric forces ordered babies murdered babies going to school, returning from school in Bamenda and Boya. Biya massacred 6 of our children in Mother Francisca Secondary School in Kumba and 11 in Boya. He massacred more than 21 persons, including babies, mothers and babies in Garbo on Valentine's Day in 2020. Biya expels humanitarian organizations in Amazonia responding to the plight of victims of his senseless slaughter of civilians. He has forcefully disappeared more than 1,000 Amazonians since the 22nd of September 2017. His administrators and appointed leaders have called the people of southern Cameroon's Amazonia dogs, rats, and roaches. Biya has put people in special jails who have been languishing under despicable conditions for 6, 7, 8 years without trial. He has sentenced more than 1,500 innocent civilians, his political opponents, on trumped-up charges in military tribunals. Biya's forces have murdered many missionaries, pastors, and bishops in Cameroon and Amazonia, including an American missionary called Charles Wesco, with impunity. He has a secret killing squad called Commandement Opérationnel that has massacred hundreds of his political opponents. He has never truly won an election since 1992. He snubs diplomats and war leaders who care to tell him the truth about his bloody hands. Fellow Amazonians, dear Americans, Paul Biya, by this alone that you have heard, and if you doubt it, check the latest reports by Human Rights Watch and AmazoniaGenocideLibrary.com. Paul Biya is worse than Idi Amin of Uganda, is worse than Robert Mugabe of Zimbabwe, is worse than Saddam Hussein of Iraq, is worse than Muammar Gaddafi. These did not do 1/100th of what Paul Biya has done and is still doing to the people of southern Cameroon's Amazonia. Yet, none of these people I mentioned could have been received at the White House for any reason whatsoever by a president of the United States at a time like this. What makes Paul Biya different today, if I may ask? Mr. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, you tweeted on Twitter not too long ago that there shall be visa restrictions to Cameroonians who are obstructing peace. I wonder who you had in mind when you tweeted, considering that Biya is the chief perpetrator of the war with the people of the southern Cameroon and man against peace. How do you honor the mastermind and punish the collaborators? For your information, if you are not aware, Paul Biya attended the US Africa Summit invitation along with Defense Minister Betty Assomo, who is personally overseeing the unending massacre of Amazonians with impunity. Also, he came with 12 members of his war cabinet. Mr. Secretary, tell us what has changed with Biya of 2022 to merit him and his blood-tested team such a generous exemption on your announced visa restriction policy. The previous administration under President Donald Trump cut some military aid going to Paul Biya's killer regime, which he used to kill Amazonians. He removed La République du Cameroun from AGOA and more. Sir, have the conditions which led to the previous American position against the Biya regime changed? I don't think so. I think, however, that if there is any change, it is not for the better, it is for the worse. Paul Biya rejected Resolution 684 of the US Congress. This year, he rejected mediated talks without precondition, which America recommended. And he has openly opted to kill his way to normalcy in the southern Cameroon's Amazonia as his choice solution to redress the legitimate political demands of the people of the southern Cameroon's Amazonia. Biya's killer forces are now combing our villages and cities like maniacs, picking up our people at random and killing them in cold blood. They just break into houses at the wee hours of the morning and round up any and everything standing on two legs, executing them and dumping their corpses wherever they choose. Does that sound like the solution America has endorsed for the ongoing war Biya declared against the innocent people of Amazonia? Paul Biya has sent envoys everywhere telling stakeholders such as the United Nations and maybe now the US that they have already won the war and that life has returned to normal in the southern Cameroon. Who believes that to be true? My advice to the wise and the powerful in America is to choose the side of the people of the Cameroons, the people of Amazonia, unless you think that when Biya tells such lies, he is representing the people of the southern Cameroons. Leaders come and go. The people of Africa and Amazonia will remain. I will never forget those who stood with them. America should not dine with a drowning dictator like Paul Biya and sacrifice the wishes of the millions of people in the Cameroons. And dear State Department, any attempt to prescribe ready-made solutions for Biya is not the way to go, because Biya has never done what anybody tells him to do except the French. The only solution to the Amazonian La République conflict is to bring Biya to the table to meet the southern Cameroon's Amazonia. And the final solution will emerge on that table, not from the White House, not from Champs-Élysées, and not from the European Parliament, but from a comprehensive negotiated agreement. We don't need a referendum. We may prefer a second plebiscite, if at all, because that presupposes that we are autonomous and sovereign. The much heralded referendum concept is used by a non-sovereign entity seeking secession to decide their destiny. and majority yes becomes the first law of secession for that entity. We are not trying to secede. We are a sovereign people by United Nations standards. We don't need a referendum. The United Nations knew this truth and gave us a plebiscite instead of a referendum in 1961. Because a majority yes in a plebiscite does not automatically cede our sovereignty, while a majority vote in a referendum will. A majority decision in a plebiscite still leaves us with the power to decide what type of union we want, if at all. Those who disapprove Russia's sham referendum in Luhansk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson, in part of Ukraine today, should see why it is wrong to recommend a referendum to La République du Cameroon as the solution to the Amazonian problem. I call on African leaders present in Washington today to tell Paul Biya, you cannot embark on annihilating a sovereign people who decided to join you freely without war. Just as you cannot kill your abused fiancé if he decides to not continue with the marriage. African leaders, we should start helping each other in solving Africa's problems. We cannot be claiming Africa for Africans, but when there are serious conflicts tearing apart a fellow African country, we look away, waiting for an erstwhile colonial master, the US or EU, to take the initiative. Where are the elders in the continent of Africa? There is an African proverb which says, until a person starts to assume the responsibilities of another fellow man, that person cannot be known as an adult in the community. Where is the AU on the issue of the conflict between La République du Cameroon and Amazonia? I call on the Amazonian people also to remain hopeful that America, the beacon of freedom, cannot sacrifice her values on the world stage because of an alien, bloodthirsty dictator like Paul Biya. I think America is trying to reach out to a sleazy dictator that is unreachable. Whenever you send envoys to reach him, it's impossible. Our concern should be the message from President Biden to dictator Paul Biya. I also want to caution the recent prosecution of some of our comrades in the US. It is not an action premeditated by the US government against Amazonia. It is a matter brought before the court by certain individuals residing in the United States. The law will follow its course. We have no problem with that. Instead of street demonstrations on this matter in DC, we should rather mobilize for a robust defense in court to vindicate our comrades who engaged in activities protected by the United States Constitution. I urge Amazonians to contribute to our legal defense fund and do so now, and accompany our comrades to court, whether in Maryland or in Kansas or Minnesota. It is never a crime to provide defense for somebody in court. Even the government does it. All for one, one for all. The verdict of these cases will establish a reference law that will influence opinions and guarantee our greater protection within the framework of existing laws in America. Remember, this is the United States, where you are innocent until proven guilty. The innocent should do the right thing and know that the enemy wanted to do us evil, but our God will surely use it for our good in this struggle. God bless our beautiful country, and God bless the United States of America. Thank you.